Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, separation, and parenting apart. If your marriage or partnership has ended, or you have friends and family who are separating, this podcast is for you. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In each episode, we look at relationships and separation from different angles, including the emotional, legal, and social. I'm joined by experts and special guests who share their own unique stories, experience, and tips with the goal of helping people end relationships in a kinder and better way. In this episode, I'm joined by Paul Richardson, an amicable divorce specialist, and Carlie Norris, an accredited family mediator, to discuss how the voice of the child can be heard during divorce and separation. We begin by discussing how child arrangements were made historically and what the current options are for separating parents. Paul goes on to explain how Amicable's service helps with child arrangements, and Carlie talks about the process and benefits of child-inclusive mediation. We also talk about how transparent conversations can reduce the overall levels of conflict and strengthen relationships between both co-parents and children. We finish off by giving tips on how to navigate the emotional side of divorce and separation for both you and your children. If you loved this episode, then please subscribe and rate us on your preferred listening platform. Welcome, Carlie, and welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you for having me.
It's lovely to see you both. I'm delighted to host you on the podcast. So let's start, if we can, with Carlie. And can you give us a little bit of background on what you do and how you help families?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a family mediator and I'm child inclusive trained. So my job has, I suppose, lots of different aspects to it. So I would mediate anything to do with children's matters or finance and pension matters. And I would say with my skill set is obviously coming from a restorative and a children's services background. So my focus in the mediations that I facilitate is around how we centre the conversation around children's needs and how we start to create a child-centred approach to the solutions that the parents are working together to come up with. And we can do that either by doing something like child-inclusive mediation, which is where a child-inclusive trained mediator would meet with the children with everybody's consent, parents' consent and child's consent, normally in a neutral environment, and hear views, hear wishes, talk to them, give them information, create a space for them to feel part of the process. Their job is not to make decisions. That's the adult's job, is to make decisions, but their job is to have a space to feel heard, a space to feel involved, and a space to also be given the right information that they might want to explore in their own time. Anything they wish to be fed back, I can then take back to their parents and feed that back as part of the bigger mediation process. Not everybody wishes to do child inclusive mediation, and that doesn't mean that we don't put the children at the centre. So we can, if child inclusive mediation isn't involved, we would find other ways to ensure that children are at the centre of the process.
I think there's a big sway of opinion, isn't there, that this has a very positive impact on everybody in the process, not just the children, but the adults as well. And for some, I guess for some parents, it might be the first opportunity they've had to actually include or talk about the separation when they actually sit down formally with somebody in a way they feel safe and contained, and they can ask the questions that they sort of want to ask and can actually explain some of the detail. Because I think for a lot of parents, the feeling is they're so frightened of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, that to have a space where it's facilitated, you've got an expert in the room, you can have sessions, preparation sessions before you allow children into that process or encourage children into that process. I think that is a big relief for some parents, isn't it? Because it's quite daunting. You know, we get a lot of people, don't we, Paul, who come to us, and I'm sure you do as well, Carlie, where they actually don't know how to say some of this stuff because it's not anything that any of us have ever been taught before. But how do you actually have that first conversation to say, the relationship between me and your mum or me and your dad is over. It's incredibly stressful. Paul, just give us a little bit of history then, because you've got this legal background as well, so I'm interested. What's the history of how child arrangements have been organised in the past? It feels like there's a move, as Carlie was saying, to a much more child inclusive sort of way of doing things. But in the past, what has it been like, and what might be some of the experience we have as adults if we are the children of divorced parents? What might they be, and how are things very different these days?
I think historically, certainly when it's going back 2005 when I started in law. Before I qualified, I went straight into family law out of uni. Back then, historically, it was if you couldn't agree the arrangements, it was default to solicitors, and if they couldn't agree, it was default into the court. And that's obviously where the conflict arises. You get polarized into positions, into different camps, and obviously costs and stress and time. I mean, court proceedings were getting on to being nearly 18 months long by the time I stepped away from it 6 months ago. But thankfully, I think in the last, Carlie, I'm sure will support this, probably in the last 5 to maybe 10 years, there's been a shift towards probably being more child focused and more co-parent focused. Co-parenting has become very much a buzzword these days in terms of encouraging people to co-parent and separate that relationship they had as a couple into their co-parenting relationship, because it's a vastly different dynamic, moving away from where you were as a couple into co-parenting. It's a whole different level of trust, boundaries, communications, and some couples can deal with that transition fairly easily. Some couples need a lot of help. So I think, there has been a shift, which I'm pleased about, but historically, there was this very adversarial approach of we need to get court orders, which in themselves are very prescriptive, very, very, you must do this, you must do that. And, here at Amicable, Kate, we're very much now, aren't we, working in terms of shifting that focus and the mindset of parents into a more co-parenting mindset and very child focused. And I'm pleased it's going that way now.
And I think some of that is there's been a huge shift in the language that we use. And I, for one, am so grateful for that. We talk about speaking in plain English, avoiding legal jargons, ensuring that our language is personal and proportionate. It's about problem solving, and it's positive. We need to talk about how we create and find solutions and how we do this together. And I think that that's a huge shift, cultural shift in the family law world. And I think what comes with that is more confidence for parents to be able to have these conversations, for parents to be able to open up these conversations with their children, but also creates a different shift in narrative, whether you're using a solicitor, whether you are, needing a court process, whether you're using a mediator. I think it opens up a much kinder narrative separation. And I think that is really fundamental to be able to open other doors, like create child inclusive mediation as just a normal part of the process, or the child's voice as a normal part of the process.
Well, I think the way we kind of describe it is we're trying to focus on the relationship rather than a piece of paper. And I think some of the media coverage, some of the sort of TV stuff and the stuff you hear, it's all about a piece of paper that sets out who's entitled to what. And I think that is all of the unhelpful language, because we all know from experience, and I know from personal experience as well, you can have the most detailed written order. If someone's not going to follow it, there is not a lot you can do about it unless you want to keep going through that revolving door of the court. And that's your life. And, you can be in Children Act proceedings for a decade or more, and it completely takes over everything. So I think the focus on the relationship, and as Paul, I think you were saying, it's that transition from being a parent in a romantically linked relationship to being a parent in a platonic relationship, where you are effectively becoming sort of almost business partners, the business being raising 2, 3, 4, 1, however many happy, healthy children, and preparing them for adult life. So it's just a very different way of looking at things. And a piece of paper is never going to solve that. Never going to solve that.
And, shifting those words from custody and verses and rights to things like responsibility and child arrangements, and how we're going to co-parent and care for our children together, I think is such an important thing to ensure that we do.
Definitely I agree. I think as well, I think it's, I adopt the approach of, I want to be able to help parents almost understand that actually the example they're going to be setting to their children now is going to shape them for their future. And I think when we go through difficult times, we often not maliciously, but we become very tunnel visioned on how we're feeling. Will I get through this? Will I be okay? Where am I going to be? Because that's just our human instinct. But I think we as professionals in what we do have the ability to be able to help people step away from that. I think, okay, I understand how you're feeling. It's wholly normal, but your children are feeling exactly the same way. So all of the anxiety that you're worried about the future, all of the will I be okay? What's going to change? The children have the same feelings and same worries. And I just try to work on getting people to understand that and say, well, what do you need right now in terms of getting through this? Or if you've come through the other side, what helped you? Because if you know what helped you, you can then help your children. And it's shifting that mindset into, there's a hell of a lot going on here. Often there's finances to deal with. You've got, where am I going to live? Will I have enough money? Trying to balance job, work, school runs, kids. It can be awfully overwhelming. And I think we can help with that, to take some of that away and just say, well, let's kind of box things up a little bit and go, we need to deal with this and what's best for the kids. And I'm very, very passionate about making people try to think about the impact of the children and the example that they're setting, because how they're going to shape their relationships in the future, it's shaped by their parents. And they've got a very good opportunity to say, well, look, relationships end, it's adults go through things, and sometimes they get on better when they're not together anymore. And you're setting that example to them, I think. And you're teaching them that it's okay to separate, but you can separate and maintain healthy relationships.
Yeah, I think, as you say, it doesn't have to mean the end of a relationship. It's a change in the relationship status, and you've got to try and explain that. But I guess one of the things I'm always conscious with whenever we talk about what parents should do is falling foul of preaching and criticizing. So I think we should say this isn't easy stuff to get your head around and do. It's hard, and I'm perfectly happy to own that I have failed miserably at this in my own life. So I don't want anyone to feel that we're preaching here, but we're trying to highlight the options, I guess. So on that sort of more positive note then, what Carlie, are the modern day options for sorting out child arrangements? What could you do as a parent?
Yeah, so there's lots of options available to you. I suppose I look at it as almost like a bit of a pyramid. And at the bottom of the pyramid, there is sorting them out yourselves. So you're sitting around the kitchen table, finding what works for you, finding what wouldn't work for you. You can, bring your children into those conversations or not, but finding ways to resolve the child arrangements yourself. You have something like mediation. And I would really like to say that mediation doesn't need to be when there is an issue or when there is a problem or when something has happened. Even if things are going really well, sometimes just a conversation with a family law practitioner or mediator or somebody that can just help you to think about the things that maybe, exactly like you said, Paul, sometimes there's just things that we're not thinking about or we haven't thought about or that might feel a little bit more confusing than other things. So that is our job. That's what we're here to do. You have other things like arbitration, where you can pick an arbitrator and ask them to have a view on how you might be able to move forwards. There's early neutral evaluation, which you can also do as part of a kind of wider process, such as mediation. And then I suppose at the very tip, and there's negotiations through solicitors as well. And I think that every single person that works with families through separation has an absolute place. And I think we all work really well together. And I think that we can support families to make sure that they're accessing the right people for them at the right stage of wherever it is that they're at. And I suppose right at the top of that triangle, we have court. Court needs to be there, but it should be there for people that need it the most, that can't, for whatever reason, whether that's because it's unsafe or whether that's because they're just not able to enter into any of the other processes. That would be what the court is there for.
Yeah, we sometimes give court a bit of bashing, don't we? But, I know from my own experience, when there's been some kind of abuse or something like that, it's dangerous to negotiate with an ex-partner, and therefore you have to be very careful about which of the processes you use. I guess the difficult thing is, where do you go to find out all the different processes to know which one you're supposed to go to? I know that's a big bugbear of mine, and trying to persuade various departments and government to try and get a seamless place where we can all go if our relationships break down, and get neutral advice and be told all the different options and then go off and be able to do it. It feels like that's just, if I could have my magic wand, that is the one thing I would do. But Paul, tell us a little bit about the amicable process then. So Carlie mentioned mediation. Amicable's process is slightly different, isn't it? So what do we do that's slightly different to mediation?
Yeah, so we still work with couples together as a collective. I think that's important to remember that we're trying to help the couple together. And I often say this to amicable customers is that we're probably mediation is very much information given, isn't it, Carlie? We're limited to information, in terms of this is the sort of things a court could do or couldn't do. I tend to find here at Amicable we can be a bit more direct in the approach that we give, but we have the same principles of guiding parents. We have a great service for the finances and dealing with the finances, which is a process to go through the divorce, and the finances is a process. But we also have the separating with children service, which is a bespoke service dedicated to the children. And in that session, we can deal with everything that goes with co-parenting. So the arrangements, obviously, first and foremost, which generally I always say is actually the easiest part. And that shocks people sometimes when I say that, is actually sorting out where the children will be and when is the easiest part. The hardest part is maintaining that, and how are you going to deal with change, and how are you going to deal with when arrangements for a 4 and a 2-year-old, when they're 7 and 5, they're going to have to be constantly changing. So often people say, well, no, we're okay with the child arrangements. We've sorted them for now. And I say, well, yeah, okay, but how are you going to maintain that? And Amicable covers all of that. We're trying to think of things in the future that can cause conflict, because we want your co-parenting relationship to be maintained and remained intact. So I think, we created that service because we felt that there's an opportunity there to help parents, to give guidance, to deal with those kind of issues, because Kate touched upon it. It's an awfully difficult thing to go through. It's, divorce, separation, it's traumatic. And I think sometimes we can get lost in the emotions of stuff. And we
our
at
own
Amicable,
emotions, yeah.
yeah, and we offer that third eye, I suppose, without the emotion attached to it, to be able to look at it probably in a more pragmatic way and offer guidance. And we're highlighting what we can offer and the sort of things that we can help you tick off to avoid conflict. But it's an ever-changing thing. So you can come back and have another session. It's kind of, with children, it's all trial and error, isn't it? Some things will work, some things won't. So have a session. Let's sort things out now. Let's work on communication, your boundary setting perhaps on communication, and then see how it goes and come back. And I think we just found, didn't we, Kate, that it's not as procedural as the divorce and finances. You have to go through that process, and those sessions they need to go through. With the children, it's by a session. It's a 90-minute session with a specialist like myself. There's a few of us here at Amicable, and have a session. If you want to come back, have another one. And it's just another way of helping. Carlie, you said that every legal professional, whether it be a lawyer, mediator, negotiator, Amicable, we all have our place. We all have certain skill sets that's going to help people. And it's kind of what we do, isn't it, Kate? We have that separating with children service, which is, I think, is a great service. I really enjoyed helping people and going through that.
Let's dig into a little bit more then on that. So we've got different people offering different types of sessions, but if we're talking about child inclusive mediation, Carlie, specifically, and we're talking about having children's voices involved, you touched on this at the very beginning, but let's just dig in a bit more detail. What does that look like? So what's the process for setting that up? And what can I expect as a parent if I want my child's voice to be heard in our discussions about how we're going to look after them?
So how that looks for my service is, I should probably caveat this with, you would need to be child inclusive trained, and you can't do that unless you're an accredited mediator. So there's lots of parameters around us to ensure we're practicing in the right way. And so for me, I would be working with 2 people around their separation. We've probably had a couple of sessions already. I would have spoken from the very beginning about child inclusive mediation. And when it feels like the right time for everybody, then we would explore the option of me meeting with the child or children. To do that, I have to have consent from both parents, and then I write to the child either directly if they're old enough or via the care of both parents, and I invite the child, so they too have a choice. Everything in the mediation world is completely voluntary at all points. So I would write to the child or children, and if they wish to meet with me, we set that up. Some of the really key features that I think make child inclusive mediation what it is that my job isn't to ask any direct or prescriptive questions. My job is to just give them a space to explore, to sit with somebody who works in this industry, who can signpost, who can chat them through whatever it is that they want to talk through. I've played football, I've played hockey, I've played pool, I've done a lot of cool things. But my job is also, if they wish for me to share things with their parents, then they share things with me and we work through how I might share that with their parents, what that might look like. I don't share anything without permission, unless, of course, I'm worried about somebody's safety, and then that's an entirely different conversation. But I don't share anything without permission. My job is to create an environment where I am sharing the child's voice, if they wish me to their parents, but then ensuring that what we do from that is empower and work with the parents to be able to create a set of arrangements that is going to hopefully work for everybody. And there's a really important end part to that child inclusive mediation, which is the feedback loop. So somehow we want to ensure that that child still understands what it is that's going to happen moving forwards, but also have another opportunity to meet with me if they want to. We all know, don't we, if we go into a doctor's surgery and we've spent 10 minutes talking about one thing and then we leave and think, oh my goodness, I wish I'd said this. So it's really important that we don't put everything on one meeting. And so we offer for children and young people to come back and meet with us again if there's something else that they wish to share. And then my job is to work with the parents to navigate through all of that and see whether they can find something that feels meaningful and sustainable. Back to Paul's point, which I think is really, really crucial. Children change all the time. Life changes all the time. What works for a child at the age of 2 is not going to work for a child at the age of 10 or 15. And so we have to create something that has really good foundations, really stable foundations, but can also be amended and changed and worked with either back to us or themselves throughout that child's life.
That's really interesting. When you were talking at the beginning there, I was thinking you saying, I'm not going to ask them direct questions. I guess as the parent, and maybe I can just try and pretend to be the voice of the listener here a little bit. I guess one of my biggest fears would be, oh my God, you're going to ask them whether they want to live with me or my partner. And that would be my initial, but it's really reassuring to hear that it's nothing as blunt and blatant as that. It's a much more subtle sort of coming to an understanding of what's important to this child without it having to name a parent or give this child the sort of Sophie's choice question.
And do you know what? Some of the most random conversations have been the most poignant conversations, and they're the things that we often miss. And they're the things that when we're thinking about the really big things, we miss the really small things. And sometimes those really small things are the most important things to children. And it can help focus us all in on what is most important to hold close.
And I guess my other fear as the parent on the other end of that is, what happens if my child wants something and then one of us, me or my partner, doesn't want it? How do you manage that disappointment almost, I guess, isn't it? Or that feeling that, well, you've asked me what I want, but I'm not going to get it. So how does that get managed?
I mean, I think the job of a mediator or somebody that works in this field is to manage expectations, full stop. I think that's what we do best. And I think that is how we introduce what this process is, both to the child or children, young people, but also to the parents. That's where the feedback loop comes in. If something isn't possible, let's work out a way that we can feed back to the children why that isn't possible, but what might be possible as a result. That also comes back for me to the point that children aren't decision makers in this. Parents are decision makers. And that is really important. That's far too much pressure for a child to carry on their shoulders. That is for the adults to do, and making that really clear, those foundations from the very start really clear. So everybody knows exactly what is expected of them and how we're going to do it and what that looks like and what the aftercare is like as well. We should be signposting families, parents, children, young people into other places if they want it, if they need it, so that there is some support once the mediation process is over or once we have met with the children and young people. And good information can be really conflicting on the internet. I know that's, as you said, Kate, earlier, it's a particular frustration of mine how conflicting the information can be and how already challenging this arena is to navigate your way through, let alone when the information isn't clear. So part of our job is, I suppose, to demystify all of that and set the information out in a really clear, accessible way.
Yeah. And Paul, do you think there's kind of like an appropriate age where children become able to participate in sort of some form of child inclusive mediation?
Yeah, I'd usually say 10 upwards has always been traditionally kind of the age where, if you go back to the old Kafka's wishes and feelings reports that used to be done in court proceedings, usually they'd say an age of 10 upwards, get it competent, and and all of that. It's very difficult when you have younger siblings and older siblings in child inclusive mediation, isn't it, Carlie? I think, if you've got a 12-year-old and maybe an 8-year-old, which is really common, it's striking the balance. Okay, perhaps I may bring the 8-year-old into the process because I think their views and that sibling dynamics quite important to consider. So I'm usually saying 10 is probably about the age I would normally bring them into the process, or feel that they're of an age where they probably know a bit more in terms of what they want to do. Any younger, I'm starting to be a little bit dubious about, are they fully understanding the implications of their decisions or what they're saying? And I think younger children need to be more guided by their parents and the adults in the process. Carlie hit the nail on the head. I think making sure that they're not decision makers is critical. And I think with any process where parents are trying to deal with children matters, I think giving children the voice is critically important. I think that is massively important, but reassuring the children that they're not going to make decisions, but more describing it in a way to them of, for us to know what to do in this situation or to make decisions for you, we'd like to know how you're feeling, understand your feelings, understand what you'd like to happen, because we're not going to ask you to make any decisions. That's for us to make, but we would like you to have a say in what you'd want to do, to help us make those decisions. And often it's just helping the parents understand that maybe for us to be able to make some decisions, we'd like to know how you're feeling. I think just that simple phrase can go a long, long way to creating that better, long-standing relationship.
Well, it's an important point, isn't it, just to draw the distinction between a formal child inclusive mediation process that, Carlie was explaining with all the boundaries around that, versus being more child inclusive generally as you separate or divorce. And those simple questions, I mean, I say they're simple. It's not simple to think of them and it's not simple to execute them when you're feeling under huge pressure. But those questions that can try and engage your child or children to actually feel part of something rather than it's something that's being done to them or that they have no volition or no say. I think that makes a huge difference. And forgive me, I can't remember which one of you said it before, but about the relationships within the family and how they all form the glue of your sort of new and onward life. I think that is absolutely crucial. So any tips around those small conversations that can have such a big impact, I think are priceless.
And I think for me, every process should be child-centred. Whether you've got child inclusive mediation or not, whether you hear the child's voice in a direct way, I think every process should be child-centred. And I think that's everybody's responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility to ensure that somehow we create a really clear focus. And that child inclusive mediation isn't always the right process for a family, and that's okay. But I think we can still be child-focused and child-centred.
Absolutely, Carlie, because I think at Amicable, I had a session recently where the parents wanted to tell the children about the separation, didn't even discuss, where they'll be, where they'll live, or any of the arrangements. They just wanted, Paul, can you help us here? We don't even know where to start on telling the children. How do we tell them? When do we tell them? What do we say? What questions will they ask us? And I spent 90 minutes going through how to tell the children what questions they might ask, how they're feeling. And it actually, at the start of the session, there was a little bit of conflict because one wanted to tell them now, one wanted to wait. But once you made it child focused and child centered, the parents just completely opened up in that session and realized, actually, we have something that we are jointly responsible for here for the rest of our lives. And I always say to couples, these worries don't stop when they hit 16 and 18. When they're 20, 30, 40, you're going to be worried about your kids. So you're going to have this tie for the rest of your lives. And right now you've got the ability to deal with your separation, but fundamentally put the children first. And like I said at the very start of the podcast, is that don't forget that these little people, they can't express their emotions in the same way as we can as adults, but they are feeling exactly the same way. And when this news hits them, it's going to turn their world upside down. So just think about how you're going to present this to them, and you present a united front, and that approach, that a kind of solid approach as parents, is going to give them the best opportunity in life to kind of understand what separation is and how this is going to look for them. And that often reduces conflict from the outset, and it becomes a much more child-focused discussion.
I think what's really important there is drawing a really clear focus on this is a transition. And whenever a human being goes through any form of transition, we need things in that transition. So identifying what the needs are and finding a way to meet those needs, both for the adults and the children in that scenario, is the way that you navigate through that transition, and you are able to create your reality outside of that transition. But we all need things when we go through a transition.
Well, that's a hard language in itself, isn't it? Because sometimes admitting you need something, people will interpret as a sign of weakness. I often think that the amazing thing about going through a separation or a divorce is that sometimes it is the gateway to being a different and a better person. And of course, that's not to say that the breakdown of the relationship doesn't hurt and it's not important and it's not, for some people, a deep tragedy, but it is also an opportunity. And this could be the first time you have a chance to think about needs, not just your needs, but other people's needs. And particularly for parents, sometimes it's the first open conversation they've had about different parenting styles that have got nothing to do with divorcing, that are just day-to-day parenting stuff that we've all gone through, whether we're married or cohabiting or whatever. We have different styles, we like different things, and when you're together in a partnership, you let it go. There's other things that oil the wheels of the relationship, aren't there? But when you strip away that, there's no more oil, and therefore think those differences that have been there the whole time start to jar and grate. And this is the opportunity then you have to just acknowledge you have different ways of working, and one might not be better than the other, but you're going to have to navigate the fact that you're different and that you've got different styles and different ways of doing it, different priorities. You've got to then start to think about control the controllables. You can't change somebody else. You haven't done it while you're married. You're definitely not going to do it once you're divorced or separated.
I think that's great advice, Kate. I always say, try to work together. And if you can't and you need help, don't be afraid to ask and admit it. It's not a weakness to say, look, we can't do this together. I've done it in sessions with Amicable. Last week I think I had a session, and I said, look, guys, there's nothing wrong with you needing a session with me here, because some people can deal with that transition fairly easily. Some need a bit of help. But the fact that you're here together, you share the same goal. You want your children to thrive. You want them to be happy, healthy, do well at school. So actually, you're going through a separation and are on different pages in life because you're going separate ways. But actually, fundamentally, the one thing you agree upon, you share exactly the same goal. And there's no shame in needing a bit of help to regulate stuff, sort out what boundaries you need. And millions of people do it. And I think, Kate, you're right, the stigma of, we should be able to sort this out. There are kids. Well, yeah, but you're going through a hell of a lot at the moment.
Why should you?
And you
Who
might
teaches
just need
you this
somebody.
stuff,
Yeah, exactly. Using Amicable, you talk openly in a safe place, a safe environment where you can talk about your goals, what you want to achieve. And I often ask, how do you want this relationship to work now? How do you want this co-parent relationship to work? What do you need? What do you need to make this easier? And just that conversation of, I don't want as much communication anymore, so I need to move on. So my boundary is about collection, drop off, return if the kids have been ill. I need to know that information, but that is my information. And then you've communicated that boundary, and people aren't unwittingly overstepping boundaries. Conflict is avoided. And it's those conversations that can go a long, long way to just helping. And I think asking for that help is critically important.
Just support, just all you did there was take something from a position or a perspective into a need. And we can find solutions for needs. Trying to find solutions for positions and perspectives is a really challenging thing to do. But every position is driven by need. And our job is to just kind of help you sift through them. And, there are other things like separating parenting programs, great resources to be able to go and understand. I'm a big fan of them. And I think that they can, again, give you some tools, give you some understanding, give you some different ways of thinking and working together. There's so much out there. I think, Kate, it goes back to your point of where do we find these things and how do we know that they're available, and getting some information out there that is really, really solid, neutral, positive information about where you can go and find the different resources that you might need.
And just normalizing the requirement for help. I mean, that's the key thing, isn't it? And also, Paul, your point there, this isn't about all being happy clappy and spending Sunday afternoons together as a family or anything like that. It can be, quite clear and clip boundaries about having some space and not needing that level of interaction with each other. So all parents, whatever the relationship, if you can work together to make that clear boundaries and to have that dialogue and to keep the open dialogue. It doesn't mean that you've forgiven whatever there is to forgive. It doesn't mean you're not hurt. It doesn't mean any of those things. You can still need to process all of that. This is something that is sitting separate to how you're feeling about the relationship and each other, but that needs to have some working component to it.
Absolutely. It's that emotional journey that we talk about, isn't it, Kate? A lot in what we do, people are going through that emotional journey and are probably at different stages in that journey. And I think working with couples to understand, okay, you might be here in that journey and he or she's ahead of you. It doesn't make her right or wrong, or you right or wrong for where you are in your journey. But you need to go through that journey. You need to feel that and you need to feel the emotions of it. But where you have children involved, there comes a point where you need to somehow separate that. And because what's gone in that relationship doesn't mean that, if trust is broken down in your romantic relationship or communication is broken down, it doesn't mean that it has or should do in the co-parenting relationship. It's a wholly different relationship. And it's that which I think couples I've found most recently need help the most on. And they get that right now, then they can deal with the other stuff they have to deal with. It. You need to feel what you're going through to process it and overcome it. They might need external help to do that, other professionals, with not with my skill set, but I can help with the children and say, well, look, you can give your children the opportunity now to shape their life. They're going to be different. They're going to probably feel different at school. Different, parents are separated. Their friends' parents aren't separated. There's a lot children go through in separation that perhaps we don't understand as adults. And I think there is now a massive shift towards that understanding. Something as simple, when I raised it in a session, Kate, the other week, said, just started school, he's gone to school, perhaps he's the only child in his class with separated parents or one of the few. And he's going to feel that, or he's going to feel different. And how are you going to make him feel reassured, less different? And yeah, I understand what's happening, but my mum's here, my dad's here. There's so much to it that I think people don't understand. And I'm driven to try to help people be that child focused.
And I think in a more broader term, some of the workshops I've done with children and young people, just in a more broader term, to help us understand children and young people's needs and where we're not doing things right in this world, what information needs to be out there and so on and so forth. I think that the children and young people I've worked with have felt really empowered by talking about this subject. They may not have experienced separation themselves, but they probably have a friend who has, or know a family member who has. And this isn't about anything other than creating a narrative that is accessible to everybody. That's what this is about, because there shouldn't be shame and there should be opportunities for people to be able to talk about this if they need to and if they want to. And that doesn't stop at adults, that includes children. And finding the right way to do that is wholly family dependent. That's not for us to say what is best or not for your family, but creating some opportunities and solutions is for us to do. And then it's up to families where they feel is best for them.
Just some final tips from each of you. If somebody's listening to this, they've never heard of sort of this inclusivity piece before, what are your top tips, Carlie? What would you say to them in terms of finding out more or finding ways to include the voice of their children in their separation?
Yeah, so there are some really good websites. So like if you're looking for a mediator, something like the Family Mediation Council website has got lots of really good information on it, from child inclusive mediation to how you find a mediator to how you might be able to navigate that world. But I suppose my top tips are: be kind to yourself, work with the professionals that you're working with, ask lots of questions to find the right process. And when you are in the right process, trust the process, because this is something that we do all day, every day. And I can tell from Paul speaking today, we're really passionate about it. And our job isn't to shoehorn anything in. Our job is to try and ensure that we work with you to the best of our ability to support you to navigate your way through that separation or that divorce.
Thank you. And Paul?
I think the biggest tip I can give people is understand what you're going through. It is difficult, and sometimes needing help is important, and acknowledging that you might need the help. But there are ways in which people can help, and understanding that that co-parenting relationship that you need must remain intact, because the emotional damage it can cause your child or children in the future can be very, very damaging into long-term adulthood. So understand it's difficult. I think, Carlie, be kind to yourself is a great tip, but be kind to each other, because you need to be kind to each other to co-parent. And that is difficult. I understand it may be difficult right now, but I can reassure people in the long run, people do get there with the right help, and we are all here to try to help.
Thank you. And Carlie, where can people find out more about the services you offer?
So I've got my a business called Circle Mediation, which is, if you just type into Google Circle Mediation, you will find me. And I'm also a member of the Family Mediators Association, so you can find me through them as well.
Fabulous. And you can find Paul at amicable.co.uk. We have lots of tips and resources there, and you can book free advice consultations over the phone too. And if you want to find out more about the podcast and you like this episode and want to listen to more, please subscribe for updates by visiting thedivorcepodcast.com or on your favourite listening platform. Thank you very much both. It's been an absolute joy talking to you this afternoon, and thank you everybody for listening.